Check fire! Check fire! Blue on blue! The radio crackled, the voice distorted by static and panic. But the silence in the hide was absolute. Negative. A calm, almost whisper-quiet voice cut through the chaos. Target is hostile. I have PID. Vance, stand down. That's a friendly extract team. You take that shot, and you're drilling a hole through a SEAL team leader. Private First Class Elara Vance didn't blink. Through the scope of her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, the world was a grid of windage, elevation, and heartbeat. The man in her crosshairs was wearing multicam, moving like an operator, signaling like an operator, but he was dragging a limping hostage with the wrong hand. He's not one of ours, Elara said, her finger tightening on the trigger. The pressure was 4 pounds. Her heart rate was 45. If you are wrong, you go to Leavenworth for life, kid. If you're right, God help us, because we've been compromised since we touched down. Copy, she breathed. The wind shifted. A sudden gust of desert sand, 15 mph, full value right to left. The shot was impossible. The decision was insane. Sending it. Boom! The recoil slammed into her shoulder, a dull thud that echoed the finality of a career, or the start of a war. 72 hours earlier, Joint Base Lewis McChord, live fire range 4. The heat on the range wasn't just temperature. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the back of the neck, heavy and suffocating. At the Joint Readiness Training Center, the sun didn't shine. It hammered. Private First Class Elara Vance lay prone in the dust, her body a motionless extension of the M110 semi-automatic sniper system, SAS. She was small, barely 5'4", her frame almost swallowed by the oversized combat gear. Her spotter, a nervous corporal named Henders, was sweating enough for both of them. Wind is picking up, Henders whispered, his voice cracking. Gusting 12 to 15, 3 o'clock. I see it, Elara murmured. She didn't look at the wind flags. She looked at the shimmer of the heat waves distorting the target banks, 800 meters downrange. Behind them, the observation deck was a row of crossed arms and Oakleys. The visiting SEAL platoon, Team 4, was watching the conventional army try to play special operations. Look at the size of that kid. A voice drifted down, intentionally loud. It was Lieutenant Cole, the SEAL team leader. Recruiter must have raided a junior high science fair. Laughter rippled through the SEALs. It was the kind of laughter that wasn't just amused. It was dismissive. They weren't being cruel, exactly. They were just bored. They expected incompetence. Ignore them, Vance, Henders hissed, though his hand shook on his spotting scope. Just qualify and let's get out of here. I'm not listening to them, Elara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the anxiety that was vibrating off Henders. I'm listening to the math. Shooter ready? The range safety officer, RSO, bellowed. Target Bank Alpha, multiple hostiles, hostage scenario, engage at will. Time limit, 45 seconds. 45 seconds for 10 targets, at variable distances, in a crosswind. Send it, Henders said. Elara exhaled. The world narrowed. The laughter behind her became white noise, just another variable to be filtered out. Target 1, 400 meters, exposure time 3 seconds, crack. The steel plate rang. Target 2, 550 meters, moving left to right. She tracked, leading the target by 2 mils. She didn't jerk the trigger. She pressed it like a button on a calculator. Crack. Hit! Henders called out, surprised. The rhythm took her. It wasn't combat. It was a sequence. The rifle kicked, the brass ejected, the bolt slammed home. Crack, thump, crack, thump. She's moving too fast, one of the SEALs muttered. She's spraying. She wasn't spraying. She was processing. Target 8, 800 meters. Partially obscured. This was the impossible target. The RSO had set it behind a mesh screen meant to simulate foliage. You couldn't get a clear laser lock. You had to guess. Elara didn't guess. She knew the muzzle velocity of the M118 LR ammunition. She knew the density altitude was 3,200 feet. She knew the drag coefficient. She adjusted the elevation turret. 3 clicks up, 1 click left. Crack. The delay was agonizing. 1 second, 1.2 seconds. Ding. The faint, metallic ring of impact drifted back on the wind. Cease fire! Cease fire! Weapons clear! The RSO shouted. The silence that followed was heavy. Elara engaged the safety, popped the magazine, and cleared the chamber. She didn't look back. She just stared at the dust settling in front of her muzzle. Score check, the RSO called over the radio. The electronic scoreboard flashed to life on the large monitor above the observation deck. The SEALs turned their heads lazily. Shooter, PFC Vance, E hits 1010, center mass 910, headshot 110, target 8, time 38.2 seconds. The laughter on the deck died instantly. It wasn't just a passing score. It was a perfect run. It was a run that beat the course record held by the base's senior instructor. Bullshit, Cole said, his voice cutting through the stillness. He walked down from the platform, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. He stopped right beside Elara's prone form. She didn't stand up. She was busy logging the data into her dope book. Equipment check, Cole ordered the RSO. That rifle is modified, or the sensors are rigged. Elara finally looked up. Her face was smeared with dust and CLP oil. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, and terrifyingly calm. She looked like a child wearing her father's helmet, but her gaze was ancient. The rifle is standard issue, sir, Elara said softly. The sensors are fine. Cole squatted down, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive tactical gear and arrogance. Nobody hits the obscured target with a headshot in under 40 seconds. Nobody. Not even my guys. It wasn't luck, sir, Elara replied, closing her notebook. Then what was it? Geometry, she said. She stood up, dusting off her knees. She was a foot shorter than him, but she didn't shrink away. And the wind at 800 meters isn't doing what you think it is. It's swirling off the berm. You have to hold left, not right. Cole stared at her, his jaw tightening. He looked at the target, then back at the girl who looked like she should be in a college library, not a kill box. We run the kill house next, Cole said, his voice low, dangerous. Live fire, moving targets. No wind to save you there. You think your geometry works when people are shooting back? Math works everywhere, sir, Elara said. She slung her rifle over her shoulder. The air between them crackled. This wasn't a drill anymore. It was a challenge. And for Elara Vance, the freshman sniper, the variables had just changed. The stakes were no longer a score on a board. They were about to become very, very real. Form up on me, Vance, Cole said, standing up. Let's see if you bleed as well as you calculate. The adrenaline crash was always worse than the recoil. 30 minutes ago, Private First Class Elara Vance had been a precision instrument. Now, standing in the communal gear drop area outside the gender-segregated locker rooms, she felt like a fraud. Her hands, stripping the bolt carrier group from the M110, were trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, it was the biological tax of hyperfocus. Her brain felt bruised, overclocked by the complex trigonometry she had run in seconds. The room smelled of break-free CLP, stale sweat, and the aggressive musk of testosterone. The SEALs were in the adjacent bay, their voices booming, filling the concrete space with the easy, jagged camaraderie of men who killed for a living. Elara kept her head down, scrubbing carbon from the firing pin with a rag. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to disappear into the gray noise of the base bureaucracy. Vance. The name wasn't spoken. It was dropped like a breaching charge. Elara froze. She didn't turn around immediately. She placed the firing pin on the mat, aligning it perfectly parallel to the bolt cam pin. Then she turned. Lieutenant Cole stood in the doorway between the bays. Without his helmet and Oakley frames, he looked even more dangerous, a wall of corded muscle and controlled aggression. His eyes, pale blue and sharp, were drilling into her. He wasn't alone. Two of his team members, a heavy gunner and a comms specialist, leaned against the lockers behind him, watching like wolves circling a stray sheep. "Sir," Elara said, snapping to a position of parade rest. She was in a t-shirt and cargo pants, her armor already stowed. She felt dangerously exposed. "I pulled the telemetry logs from your scope," Cole said, walking closer. He held a ruggedized tablet in his hand. "You know what I found?" Elara swallowed. Her throat was dry. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Don't play dumb with me, Private." Cole stepped into her personal space. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. "That M110 is equipped with a ballistic computer integration. Wind sensors, rangefinders. It does the math for you. But even with a computer, nobody calculates a firing solution for a moving target through a mesh screen in 1.2 seconds. Unless..." He tapped the screen of the tablet hard enough to make a sound. "Unless someone pre-programmed the coordinates. You memorized the grid, didn't you? Or you hacked the sensor feed." "I didn't hack anything," Elara said, her voice quiet but steady. "I just took the shot." "Bullshit," Cole hissed. "You embarrassed my team out there. You made us look like amateurs in front of the base command. I don't care who your daddy is or who you're sleeping with to get this assignment. I will burn you. If you cheated, I will make sure you spend the rest of your contract scrubbing latrines in Alaska." The accusation hung heavy in the humid air. The other SEALs snickered. It was the classic dynamic. The outsider, the female, the other. They couldn't accept she was better, so she had to be a cheat. "Lieutenant?" A new voice cut through the tension. It was calm, authoritative, and tired. Major Sterling, the base commander, stood at the entrance. He held a printed report in his hand. Cole straightened up, his face shifting from predator to professional instantly. "Major, just debriefing the private on equipment anomalies." "There are no anomalies, Lieutenant," Sterling said, walking over to the workbench. He placed the report down next to Elara's disassembled rifle. "I saw the logs too." Cole pointed at the tablet. "Then you saw the calculation speed. It's impossible for a human." "Look closer at the input logs, Cole," Sterling said, tapping the paper. Cole frowned, looking down. He swiped across the screen, his brow furrowing. He stopped. He swiped back. "Input, 0, Cole read, confused. "Ballistic computer status, stand by." He looked up, first at Sterling, then at Elara. The arrogance cracked, replaced by a confused shock. "She didn't use the computer, Lieutenant," Sterling said, his voice dry. "She never turned it on. The telemetry shows 0 electronic assistance for windage or elevation. She dialed the turrets manually based on visual estimation." Silence slammed into the room. The two SEALs behind Cole stopped leaning and stood up straight. Cole looked at the small, dark-haired girl standing at parade rest. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the floor, her face burning with a mix of shame and defiance. She hadn't cheated. She was a savant. "You did that in your head?" Cole asked, his voice lower, lacking the bite it had before. The wind was full. "Value, sir," Elara whispered. "It's just math. Velocity times time of flight minus drag. It's just numbers." Cole stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. He didn't apologize. Men like Cole didn't apologize. But the threat evaporated, replaced by something colder and more calculating. He was assessing her again, not as a nuisance, but as a weapon. "Clean your gear, Vance," Cole said abruptly. He turned on his heel. "We have a briefing at 1900. "Sir?" Elara blinked. "I'm attached to the support battalion. I don't have a briefing with—" "Not anymore," Major Sterling interrupted. He looked at Elara with a mixture of pity and pride. "Orders just came down from SOCOM. Based on your performance today and the specific requirements of an emerging situation in the Horn of Africa, your unit is loaning you out." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "Loaning me out, sir?" Cole paused at the doorway. He looked back over his shoulder. The look in his eyes gave her chills. It was the look of a man who had just found a new tool and was wondering how hard he could use it before it broke. "Pack your bags, freshman," Cole said. "You're coming with us." "But I'm not an operator," Elara stammered, panic rising. "I've never deployed. I'm 19. "We don't need an operator," Cole said, stepping out into the hallway. "We need a calculator that bleeds." He disappeared. Elara looked at Major Sterling, pleading silently for a reprieve. "I can't stop it, Vance," Sterling said softly. "They need a long gun who can think faster than a microchip, and apparently that's you. Wheels up at 0400. Sterling left. Elara stood alone in the echo of the gear room. She looked down at her hands. They were still trembling. The math had saved her on the range, but now the math was sending her to war, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't calculate the outcome. The belly of the C-17 Globemaster III was a cavern of noise and vibration. It didn't hum. It roared, a constant bone-shaking frequency that made teeth ache. The air inside was recycled, cold, and smelled faintly of hydraulic fluid and stale coffee. Private First Class Elara Vance sat on the webbing of a jump seat, squeezed between a pallet of ammunition and the fuselage wall. She was physically separated from the rest of the passengers. 10 feet away, in the center of the cargo bay, Lieutenant Cole's team sprawled out with the practiced ease of men who had spent half their lives in transit. They were giants in the red tactical lighting. They slept with mouths open, played cards on a tough bookcase, or checked weapons with casual familiarity. To them, this was a commute. To Elara, it was the abduction into a foreign world. She adjusted her noise-canceling headset, but it couldn't block out the feeling of being an intruder. Nobody had spoken to her since they boarded. She was the load, excess baggage mandated by command. "Hey, Miller!" one of the SEALs shouted over the engine drone. He was a bearded man with a thick Texan accent, currently sharpening a knife that looked illegal in 3 continents. "You think the freshman brought her coloring books?" Miller, the team's breacher, snorted without looking up from his magazine. "Let her be, Tex. She's probably calculating the odds of us crashing." 0.04%, Elara whispered to herself. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes on her boots. She checked her gear for the 10th time. Her M2010 was in a hard case, secured at her feet. Her chest rig was tight. Her hands were cold. Cole was sitting near the ramp, reviewing a map under a red penlight. He hadn't acknowledged her presence since they took off. His silence was worse than Tex's mockery. It was a complete dismissal of her utility. Suddenly, the floor dropped. It wasn't a gentle dip. The massive aircraft slammed downward as if the sky had been pulled out from under it. Gravity inverted. Stomachs lurched into throats. The red lights flickered violently. "Turbulence! Secure gear!" The loadmaster's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible over the groaning metal. The plane banked hard to the left, fighting a violent cross-shear. In the center of the bay, a heavy Pelican case containing replacement batteries and comms gear hadn't been strapped down properly. As the plane pitched, the case, easily 80 pounds, slid across the metal deck like a hockey puck. It gathered speed, careening toward Miller, who was struggling to unbuckle his harness to catch it. Miller was too slow. The angle was too steep. Elara didn't think. She didn't have to unbuckle. She had loosened her harness moments ago when she felt the vibration changes in the floor plating, a precursor to the shear. She launched herself from the jump seat. She didn't try to stop the case with strength. She weighed 110 pounds, soaking wet. Physics was the only weapon she had. She dove low, changing her center of gravity, and wedged her body between the sliding case and the anchor stanchion on the floor. Crunch. The case slammed into the soles of her boots, the impact traveling up her legs and compressing her spine against the metal bulkhead. She gasped, the air knocked out of her, but she didn't fold. She jammed her heels down, locking her knees, creating a rigid bridge that pinned the case in place just inches from Miller's shin. The plane leveled out with a shuddering groan. For a second, the only sound was the engines. Miller stared at the heavy black box that had almost shattered his leg. Then he looked at the small girl pinned behind it. Her face grimaced in pain, her legs acting as a living chalk block. "Clear," the loadmaster announced, sounding shaken. Elara exhaled sharply, pushing the case away and scrambling to her feet. She didn't look for approval. She immediately checked the latches on the case to ensure they hadn't burst. "You okay?" Elara looked up. It was Miller. He wasn't sneering anymore. He looked confused. "I'm fine," Elara said, brushing off her pants. She limped slightly as she moved back to her seat. Her ankle throbbed. "That thing would have snapped my tibia," Miller said, his voice flat. "The strap was frayed," Elara said, sitting down and rebuckling. "The friction coefficient on this deck is lower when it's cold. It was going to slide eventually." Cole was watching her. He hadn't moved during the chaos, but his eyes were locked on her now. He closed his map case and stood up, walking over to the center of the bay. "Listen up," Cole said. His voice cut through the lingering tension. He didn't mention the turbulence. He didn't thank her. He just pointed to the space in the middle of the team. "Vance, get over here." Elara hesitated, then unbuckled again and walked into the circle of operators. "Since you're awake," Cole said, pulling a laminated map from his pocket and spreading it on a crate. "You might as well know where you're going to die." He tapped a location on the map. It was a dense, chaotic sprawl of streets and low-rise buildings on the coast of East Africa. Target is Al-Shabaab Senior Leadership. HVT code name, Wraith. Intelligence puts him in this compound in Sector 4. Cole traced a circle with a grease pencil. It's a dense urban environment. Sightlines are garbage. Civilians are everywhere. And we have reports of a new player in town. Cole looked at Elara. They have a sniper, a pro, not a spray-and-pray local, someone trained. He's been picking off government forces from 800 meters out. The other SEALs went quiet. A counter-sniper threat changed the entire dynamic of an operation. It meant they were hunted. "That's why you're here, freshman," Cole said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I need you on Overwatch. You find him before he finds us. If you miss, my guys don't come home. If you hesitate, my guys don't come home. Are we clear?" Elara looked at the map. She saw the elevation lines, the choke points, the wind tunnels created by the alleyways. She saw the geometry of death. "Crystal, sir," she said. "Good," Cole rolled up the map. "Get some sleep. We drop in 2 hours. And Vance?" She paused. "Good catch." It wasn't a compliment. It was an acknowledgement of competence. And in this world, that was the only currency that mattered. Elara went back to her seat, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the silence of exclusion. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a team waiting for the other shoe to drop. The heat hit them the moment the ramp dropped, not as a temperature, but as a physical blow. It was a suffocating, wet blanket of 40-degree air that smelled of burning plastic, rotting fish, and open sewage. Private First Class Elara Vance stepped off the bird and onto the cracked tarmac of the forward staging base, immediately loading into a discreet local van. The transition was a blur. 1 minute, they were in the sterile hum of the C-17. The next, they were ghosting through the outskirts of a nameless coastal city in East Africa. They infiltrated on foot for the last 3 clicks. The city was a labyrinth of half-finished concrete skeletons and corrugated iron shacks. The shadows were deep, but the heat was inescapable. Sweat instantly soaked through Elara's combat shirt, stinging the chafed skin under her plate carrier. "Hold," Cole whispered over the comms. The team froze in the alleyway. Elara took a knee, her breathing controlled but heavy. She checked her loopholed Mark V HD scope, ensuring the lens caps were still sealed against the pervasive dust. "Miller, check the OP," Cole ordered. Miller moved forward, scanning the building marked on their digital maps as Building 4. It was supposed to be a 3-story apartment complex offering a commanding view of the target compound, 2 kilometers to the west. "Boss, it's a negative," Miller's voice came back, tight with frustration. "Building 4 is rubble. Looks like an airstrike hit it months ago. Map is outdated." "Find an alternate," Cole snapped. "Negative on alternate. Everything else is single story. No elevation, no angles." Elara felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. Without high ground, she couldn't provide Overwatch. Without Overwatch, the SEALs were walking blind into a kill box. "We scrub," Tex muttered. "We can't hit the target without eyes." "I'm not scrubbing a mission because of a pile of bricks," Cole growled. He turned to Elara. "Freshman, you're the geometry nerd. Find me an angle." Elara scanned the skyline. It was jagged, broken, and low. Her eyes filtered through the visual noise, the laundry lines, the satellite dishes, the crumbling walls. She needed 30 feet of elevation to clear the intervening structures. Her eyes locked on a structure about 200 meters to their east. It was an old industrial water tower, rusted and leaning precariously. The ladder was gone, leaving only jagged metal spurs. The catwalk at the top was half collapsed. "There," Elara pointed. Cole followed her finger. He scowled. "That tin can? It's unstable. Look at the supports. 1 gust of wind and it comes down." "It's the only structure with a line of sight to Sector 4, Elara said, pulling her dope book out. "Height is approximately 45 feet. It clears the roofline of the market. I can make the shot from there." "You can't even get up there," Miller said. "There's no ladder." "I can climb the struts," Elara said. She didn't sound confident. She sounded terrified. She had a phobia of falling that made her knees weak just looking at the rusted metal. But the math said it was the only solution. Cole looked at her, then at the tower, then at his watch. "You have 10 minutes. If you fall, try not to scream. It compromises the position." Elara moved. She stripped off her assault pack, keeping only the essentials: rifle, ammo, water, and radio. She approached the tower. Up close, it groaned in the coastal wind. The metal was hot enough to blister skin. She reached up, grabbing a rusted crossbrace. The metal flaked away under her gloves. She pulled. The climb was a nightmare of physics and fear. Every muscle in her body screamed as she hauled herself up the diagonal struts. Her boots slipped on the oxidizing iron. 30 feet up, the wind hit her, swaying the entire structure. She froze, clinging to a bolt head, her eyes squeezed shut. "Gravity is a constant," she told herself. 9.8 meters per second squared. "Don't fight it, balance it." She forced her eyes open. She didn't look down. She looked up at the rusted catwalk. She crested the rim of the platform and rolled onto the grating. It sagged under her weight. She was exposed, high above the city. A silhouette against the stars, if she wasn't careful. She low-crawled to the edge, deploying the bipod of the M2010. She pulled the netting of her modified ghillie suit over the rifle, breaking up the hard lines of the weapon. "Vance is set," she whispered into her mic. "I have eyes on the objective." Through the scope, the city transformed. The chaos resolved into a grid. She saw the target compound, a walled villa with armed guards patrolling the perimeter. She saw the heat signatures of engines cooling in the courtyard. "Copy, Vance. We are moving to the breach point." Cole's voice was calm. "Keep us safe." Elara scanned. She divided the sector into lanes. Scan left to right. Scan near to far. She checked the rooftops surrounding the villa. The briefing had mentioned a sniper, a pro. Nothing. Just trash and shadows. She widened her field of view. She looked further back, beyond the immediate perimeter. There. 800 meters north of the target, in the shadowy recess of a minaret balcony. A flicker. Not a movement, but a disruption in the pattern of the darkness. A shape that was too straight to be organic. She dialed up the magnification to 25x. It was a barrel. A long, heavy barrel protruding from a murder hole knocked into the masonry. And behind it, the faintest thermal bloom of a human body. The enemy sniper wasn't watching the villa. He was watching the approach route. He was watching the exact alleyway where Cole and the team were currently stacking up. "Breaker, this is Vance," she whispered, her heart hammering against the concrete deck. "Freeze! Do not, I repeat, do not cross the intersection." "Why?" Cole's voice was tense. "We're on a timeline." "I have a visual on the unknown shooter," Elara said, her finger hovering over the safety. "He's overlooking your breach point. If you step out, he takes your head off." "Can you take him?" Cole asked. Elara adjusted her windage. The wind was gusting off the ocean. The tower was swaying beneath her. The shot was 900 meters. Angle of inclination was steep. "He's deep in a hide," Elara said. "I have a target size of maybe 4 inches, and this tower is moving." "Take the shot, Vance," Cole ordered, "or we're dead." Elara breathed in. The smell of rust and salt filled her lungs. She wasn't a girl on a shaky tower anymore. She was the variable that solved the equation. "Stand by. Stand by," Elara repeated, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. Through the scope, the enemy sniper, let's call him the Ghost, shifted slightly. He wasn't smoking, wasn't fidgeting. He was a statue carved from patience. His barrel was fixed on the intersection of Market Street and Alley 4, the exact spot where Miller's point man was about to step out. "Take the shot, Vance!" Cole's voice hissed in her ear, tight with urgency. "We are exposed in 5 seconds." Elara's finger curled around the trigger of the M2010. The range was 914 meters. The wind was full value from the left, gusting through the skeletal remains of the buildings. But the real problem wasn't the wind. It was the physics of the tower. The rusted structure beneath her groaned, swaying in an unpredictable figure-8 pattern. The crosshairs danced across the Ghost's position: chest, wall, empty air, chest. She had to time the sway, the wind, and her own heartbeat. "I can't guarantee a kill shot," Elara whispered. "The platform is unstable. If I miss, he pins you down and calls in mortars." "We don't have a choice. We're moving. Cover us." "Negative. Hold position," Elara shouted, breaking radio discipline. Then, the static hit. A high-pitched electronic shriek tore through her headset. It wasn't natural interference. It was wide-spectrum jamming. The enemy knew they were there. "Breaker! Breaker, copy!" Elara tapped her transmit button. Nothing but white noise. She looked down at the alley. Through the green phosphor of her night vision clip-on, she saw the heat signatures of the SEAL team. They were stacking up, preparing to surge across the street. They didn't know the comms were dead. They thought she was covering them. They were trusting her green light. If they stepped out, the Ghost would tear them apart. Elara checked her scope. The Ghost was settling in, his finger tightening. He saw them. She couldn't shoot him yet. The sway was too violent. She needed 2 seconds of stillness that the wind wasn't giving her. She needed the SEALs to stop. Think. She couldn't call them. She couldn't throw a rock 2 kilometers. Her hand moved to the PEQ-15 laser module mounted on the side of her rifle. She flipped the selector to dual low, visible laser and IR. She couldn't shine it on the SEALs. That would blind them under their nods, night vision devices. She couldn't shine it on the enemy. That would warn him. She scanned the alleyway where Cole was, crouching. Directly across from him, about 10 feet up, was a shattered storefront window, a jagged shard of glass still clinging to the frame. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. Elara calculated the geometry in a split second. If she hit that glass at the right angle, the laser would flare in Cole's peripheral vision like a strobe light. She canted her rifle. She ignored the Ghost for a heartbeat. She aimed at the glass shard. Flash, 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 3 rapid pulses, the universal signal for danger. Down in the alley, Cole froze. He raised a closed fist instantly. The entire SEAL stack locked up, motionless statues in the dark. Miller, who had been mid-step, pulled his boot back. A split second later, a bullet cracked into the pavement exactly where Miller's foot would have been. The Ghost had fired. He had anticipated the movement, firing a blind suppression shot to test the waters. If Miller had stepped out, his leg would be gone. "He knows," Elara whispered to herself. The jamming cleared for a microsecond. "Contact front, sniper!" Cole's voice broke through the static. "Vance, where is he?" The Ghost was cycling his bolt. He was adjusting. He knew he had missed. He would be looking for the overwatch now. He would be looking for the muzzle flash. Elara took a breath. She forced her body to become dead weight. She synchronized her breathing with the groan of the metal tower. Sway left. Sway right. pause. The tower hit the apex of its sway. For a fraction of a second, the velocity was zero before gravity pulled it back. In that stillness, the crosshairs settled on the thermal bloom of the ghost's head. She didn't think about the man. She didn't think about the politics or the HVT or the insults in the locker room. She thought about the trajectory. 190 grains of copper and lead, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. Sending it. She squeezed. The rifle bucked, a sudden violent shove against her shoulder. The flash hider spat a tongue of fire that momentarily blinded her scope. 1, 2. The sound of the shot rolled over the city, a thunderclap in the quiet night. Splat. Through the thermal view, the heat signature in the minaret didn't just drop. It evaporated. A pink mist sprayed against the cold stone behind him. "Target down," Elara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Street is clear. Go." "Moving!" Cole shouted. The SEALs surged across the intersection, moving with the terrifying speed of predators who had just been unchained. Gunfire erupted from the compound as the element of surprise vanished. The raid had begun. Elara worked the bolt of her rifle, ejecting the spent casing. It chimed against the metal grating of the catwalk. She didn't have time to celebrate the kill. The shot had been loud. Every enemy fighter in the district now knew exactly where she was. She was no longer the hunter. She was the bait. The silence, following Elara's first kill, lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, the city exploded. "Contact front! Heavy machine gun, 12 o'clock!" Cole's voice was a jagged tear in the radio static. Down in the street, the shadows erupted into muzzle flashes. The tracer rounds from a Russian-made PKM lashed out from a fortified window on the second floor of the target villa, turning the alleyway into a blender of concrete chips and sparks. The SEALs were caught in the fatal funnel, a narrow strip of pavement with high walls on both sides and death waiting at the end. They dove for cover behind the rusted hulks of abandoned cars and piles of debris, but the cover was disintegrating under the 7.62 km/4 barrage. From her perch on the swaying tower, Elara watched the chaos unfold through the detached, green-tinted reality of her scope. It looked like a video game glitching out, but the physics were terrifyingly real. Rate of fire, 650 rounds per minute, she calculated automatically. Suppression volume, high. She cycled the bolt of the M2010. The spent casing from the previous shot was still hot on the grating. She settled the crosshairs on the window where the PKM was spitting fire. She couldn't see the gunner. He was keyholing, firing from deep within the room, using the darkness and the narrow window frame as a shield. If she fired at the muzzle flash, she would just hit the stone sill. "Vance! Suppress that gun, or we're dead!" Tex screamed over the comms. The background noise was a deafening roar of incoming fire. "I can't see him," Elara said, her voice tight. "He's behind hard cover." "I don't care! Do something!" Elara scanned the structure. It was cinder block and reinforced concrete. Her 300 Winchester Magnum rounds carried massive kinetic energy, but they weren't bunker busters. If she shot the wall, the bullet would fragment. She shifted her aim slightly to the left of the window. Through a crack in the masonry, she saw a dull, rhythmic thumping heat signature on her thermal view. It was glowing hot, vibrating, a diesel generator. It was sitting just inside the room, probably powering the compound's lights, and right next to it, stacked against the wall, were jerry cans. Fuel, velocity, 2,850 FPS, wall thickness, approx 6 inches of hollow brick. Energy transfer. She didn't need to hit the man. She needed to change the environment. "Stand by for obscuration," Elara said. She ignored the tracers that were now starting to zip past her own tower, stray rounds seeking the high ground. She centered her reticle on the solid wall, 6 inches to the left of the window frame. She exhaled. The world stopped. Boom, the rifle kicked. Down in the villa, the wall exploded inward. The bullet, deformed but carrying over 2,000 foot-pounds of energy, punched through the cinder block and slammed into the fuel canisters. The effect was instantaneous. A fireball erupted from the second-story window, followed by a thick, oily plume of black smoke. The PKM fell silent as the gunner was either thrown back by the blast or forced to flee the sudden inferno. "Target suppressed," Elara called out. "Move! Move!" "Pushing," Cole ordered. The SEALs rose from the debris like demons. They didn't run. They flowed. They advanced up the street, weapons raised, moving toward the breach point at the main gate. Elara kept her eye on the scope, scanning for secondary threats. Her shoulder ached. Her ears were ringing despite the electronic protection. The emotional weight of the violence tried to creep in, the reality that she had just turned a room into an incinerator, but she shoved it into a mental box labeled later. Scan left. Clear. Scan right. Clear. The team reached the heavy steel gate of the compound. Miller moved forward with a strip charge, slapping the explosive tape onto the hinges and the lock mechanism. "Breaching! Breaching! Breaching!" Elara watched Miller back away. Thump. The explosion was a dull concussion that shook the dust off the surrounding buildings. The heavy gates twisted and fell inward. The team stacked up, ready to flood into the courtyard. But the enemy wasn't just inside. They were on the roof. Elara caught a flash of movement on the parapet directly above the breach point. A figure leaned over, holding something spherical. A grenade. "Hi! Above the gate!" Elara shouted. She didn't wait for confirmation. She snapshot. No wind calculation, no breath control, just instinct. The bullet hit the parapet edge, showering the grenade thrower with stone fragments. He flinched, dropping the grenade. But he dropped it outside the wall, right into the breach smoke where the team was entering. "Frag out! Kick it!" Bang! The grenade detonated in the fatal funnel, just as the last SEAL was crossing the threshold. The dust cloud swallowed the team. The thermal signatures blurred into a white-hot mess. "Status!" Elara screamed into the mic, forgetting protocol. "Status!" Silence. Then coughing. "We're in!" Cole's voice came back, ragged and breathless. "But we took a hit. Tex is down. Leg is shredded. We are dragging him. We need cover in the courtyard now." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The math had worked, but the probability of chaos was always 100%. She had cleared the street, but the war had just moved inside. "I have the courtyard," Elara said, her voice trembling but hard. "Get him inside. I'll clear the path." She worked the bolt again. 4 rounds left in the magazine. She wasn't just a sniper anymore. She was their lifeline, and the line was fraying. The courtyard was a kill box washed in the eerie, monochromatic glow of thermal imaging. Through Elara's scope, the world had lost its color. Humans were no longer flesh and blood. They were ghosts of white heat against the cooling gray stone of the compound. She watched as Miller and the medic dragged Tex behind a decorative fountain. Tex's leg was glowing bright white, the massive heat dump of fresh arterial blood. "Tourniquet applied! He's stable but non-ambulatory!" the medic screamed over the net. "Eyes on the door!" Cole barked, positioning himself between his wounded man and the main entrance of the villa. "Something's coming out!" The heavy oak doors of the villa burst open. Elara tensed, her finger taking up the slack on the trigger. She expected muzzle flashes. She expected combatants. Instead, she got chaos. A wave of figures poured into the courtyard. Screaming, stumbling, women in chadors, children clinging to legs, old men waving their hands. They were heat signatures of panic, fleeing the firefight inside. "Civilians! Cease fire! Cease fire!" Cole shouted, lowering his rifle but keeping the barrel ready. "I have them," Elara whispered, her eye glued to the scope. Scanning for threats. It was a nightmare of data processing. She had to analyze every figure in milliseconds. Hands empty, no rifle shapes, no chest rigs. The civilians were running blindly toward the breached gate, right past the seals. It was the perfect cover for an extraction or an attack. "Watch the hands," Elara broadcasted. "Don't let them get close to the wounded." Then she saw her. A woman emerged from the shadows of the doorway. She wasn't running like the others. She was moving with a stiff, purposeful gait. She was clutching a bundle tight to her chest. Elara zoomed in, 15x magnification. The thermal signature of the bundle was wrong. A human baby should have a distinct heat pattern, a hot head, cooler extremities, movement. This bundle was a solid, dense block of heat, radiating evenly, and underneath the woman's robes, around her waist, there were faint, cold, rectangular patches blocking her body heat. Batteries, detonator, hard plates. The math clicked into place instantly. The density, the gate, the shielding. "Threat!" Elara yelled, her voice cracking. "Female at the door! She's wired! Suicide vest!" "Where?" Cole spun around, raising his weapon. 12 o'clock! The one with the bundle! Drop her, Cole! Drop her!" The woman was 15 meters from Cole. She was shouting something, running straight at him. Cole hesitated. He saw a mother holding a child. Elara didn't see a mother. She saw an equation that ended in an explosion. The seals were bunched up. If that vest went off, the entire command element was gone. He won't shoot, Elara realized. He sees a civilian. It was on her. The crosshairs settled on the woman's center of mass. The distance was shorter now, the wind less of a factor. It was an easy shot, a necessary shot. ROE. Imminent threat to life. Hostile intent declared. Elara squeezed the trigger, but just as the sear broke, the woman tripped. Whether she stumbled on debris or faintness, she fell forward, the bundle flying from her arms. Crack. Elara's bullet whipped through the air where the woman's chest had been a split second before, slamming into the stone doorframe with a spark that flared hot in the thermal scope. "Missed!" Elara gasped. She racked the bolt frantically. "She's down! Shoot her!" But Cole didn't shoot. He saw the bundle hit the ground. It didn't explode. It cried. A high-pitched, terrifyingly human wail echoed through the courtyard. The bundle unraveled slightly. It wasn't a bomb. It was a toddler, wrapped in layers of thick wool blankets that had trapped the heat and masked the shape. The cold plates around the woman's waist were likely just a heavy leather money belt or books protected from the war. Cole sprinted forward. He didn't shoot the woman. He tackled her, shielding her body and the child with his own armor, scanning for the real threat. "Clear! She's clear!" Cole shouted, looking up at the tower. His voice wasn't grateful. It was furious. "Check your fire, Vance! That's a baby! That is a goddamn baby!" Elara froze. Her finger hovered over the trigger of the reloaded rifle. She stared at the white-hot image of the crying child in the scope. The math had been perfect. The heat signature, the behavior, the variables, they all pointed to a threat. But the math was wrong. Nausea rolled over her, sudden and violent. She pulled her eye away from the scope, gasping for air in the hot night. She had almost killed a mother and child. She had been milliseconds away from being a murderer. I had positive indicators, Elara stammered into the mic, her voice trembling uncontrollably. The heat, the density. Get off the net, Cole snarled. Maintain sector, and don't pull that trigger unless you are 100% sure. Do you copy? Copy, she whispered. She looked back through the scope. The courtyard was clearing out. The seals were moving inside. But the image of that bullet striking the stone inches from the woman's head burned into her retinas. The arrogance of the locker room was gone. The confidence of the range was gone. Elara Vance was alone in the dark, and for the first time, she was terrified of her own weapon. She wasn't a calculator anymore. She was just a girl with a gun, and she had almost made a mistake that couldn't be undone. The radio silence that followed the incident in the courtyard was heavier than any screaming match. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the air. Elara sat slumped against the rusted water tank. Her knees pulled to her chest. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't steady her binoculars. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the thermal ghost of the woman and the child. She saw the bullet impacting the stone. She calculated the margin of error again, 3 inches. 3 inches between a soldier and a monster. Secure, Cole's voice finally broke the wham static. It was flat, cold, and utterly professional. HVT is in custody. Package is secured. We are moving to the extract point. Copy, Elara whispered. She cleared her throat, trying to sound like the operator she was pretending to be. Do you need a path cleared? Negative, Cole snapped. Maintain observation. Do not engage unless fired upon. Do not guess. Do not calculate. If you don't have a weapon in sight, you keep your finger off that trigger. Am I clear, Vance? Crystal, sir. The reprimand stung worse than the desert sand in her eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was a revocation of trust. In the sniper community, trust was the only currency. Without it, she was just a liability with a long-range telescope. Down in the compound, the team was moving. They emerged from the villa, dragging a hooded figure. The high-value target, Wraith. Tex was being carried on a litter, his leg wrapped in pressure dressings that were already dark with blood. They looked exhausted, beaten. And Elara knew she had added to that burden. She wasn't their guardian angel anymore. She was a loose cannon. Command, this is Breaker, Cole spoke into the SATCOM handset, his voice echoing slightly in Elara's ear. Jackpot secured. 1 casualty, urgent surgical. Requesting immediate dust-off at LZ Alpha. Elara scanned the horizon while Cole spoke. Her confidence was shattered, but her habit remained. She checked the sectors. North, quiet. West, quiet. South. She paused. To the south, on the main road leading out of the city, the streetlights were flickering. Not randomly, sequentially. Like power was being cut block by block. Command, be advised! The voice from the TOC, Tactical Operations Center, crackled back, urgent and loud. LZ Alpha is hot. Repeat, LZ Alpha is hot. ISR is picking up large troop movements converging on your location. We estimate company-sized element, technicals and heavy mortars. Company-sized? Cole's voice spiked. That's 100 men. We have 6, and 1 is bleeding out. They set a trap, Breaker. The first ambush was just the bait. They waited for you to grab the HVT. The extraction helo is waved off. Too much AA fire in the sector. You are on your own. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. Waved off. "Where is the alternate LZ?" Cole demanded. "LZ Bravo is 3 clicks east, but you'll never make it on foot carrying a litter. You need to hole up. Dig in. QRF is spinning up, but ETA is 30 mics, maybe 60. "We can't hold this compound," Miller's voice cut in, sounding strained. "The walls are breached. They know we're here. We need a hard point." "Vance," Cole called out. Elara jumped. "Sir? Can you see the movement to the south?" Elara forced herself to lift the rifle. She forced her eye back to the scope. She pushed the fear of the bad call deep down into her gut. I have vehicle headlights," she stammered. "Multiple trucks, moving fast. Maybe 2 clicks out. They are encircling the district. Is there a defensible structure between us and the coast?" Elara scanned rapidly. The math of survival was different now. It wasn't about trajectory. It was about structural integrity and fields of fire. "There's a ruin," she said, spotting a heavy stone building about 400 meters from the villa. It looked like an old colonial fort or a prison. Thick walls, small windows. "Grid reference 44 Bravo. It looks solid. It controls the intersection." "That's the Alamo," Cole said grimly. "Pack up, Vance. Get down from that tower. You regroup with us there." "Sir, if I come down, you lose overwatch," Elara argued instinctively. "I can cover your movement from here." "If you stay up there, you're dead," Cole said. "They have mortars. That water tower is the first thing they'll range. Get your ass down here, now." Elara looked at her rifle. The M2010 felt heavy, a burden of responsibility she wasn't sure she could carry anymore. "Moving," she said. She broke down her position with trembling hands. She shoved the dope book into her pocket, the book that contained all her formulas, all her logic. It felt like a book of lies. She swung over the edge of the catwalk. The descent was faster, more reckless than the climb. She hit the ground and started running toward the rendezvous point. The night air was cooling, but her face burned with shame. She ran through the trash-strewn alleys, the sound of distant engines growing louder like a gathering storm. She was running toward the men who despised her, into a trap with no exit, carrying a rifle she was afraid to shoot. The math had changed again. The probability of survival had just dropped to single digits. And this time, she couldn't calculate a way out. The structure Cole had called the Alamo was less a fortress and more a tomb. It was the shell of an old colonial customs house, walls thick with stone but roofless in sections, offering little protection from the sky. Elara huddled in the corner of what used to be a main hall. The floor was covered in a slurry of ancient dust and fresh shell casings. Her chest heaved, the air rasping in her throat like sandpaper. "Status!" Cole roared, reloading his MK-18. He was crouched by a window slot, his face streaked with grime. "Miller is down to 2 mags!" Miller shouted back from the opposite wall. "Tex is unconscious. Fluids are pushing, but he's pale, boss. He needs a surgeon, not a bandage." "Elara?" Cole didn't look at her. 20 rounds, Elara said, checking her magazine. She had 3 loose rounds in her pocket, and 1 smoke. "Save them," Cole ordered. "Single shots only. If you don't have a kill, don't pull." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. The enemy infantry had pulled back about 300 meters, taking cover behind the ridgeline. "Why are they stopping?" Miller asked, wiping sweat from his eyes. "They have the numbers. They could rush us." Elara looked at the geometry of the battlefield. The enemy had the high ground on the ridge. They had numbers, but they had pulled back to a safe radius. They're clearing the danger close distance, Elara whispered, realization hitting her like a physical blow. They're not rushing. Thump. A distant, dull sound, like a car door slamming miles away. Incoming! Cole tackled Miller, driving him to the floor. Boom! The mortar round impacted the courtyard of the ruin, sending a shockwave that rattled Elara's teeth. Shrapnel hissed through the air, slapping against the stone walls. Dust rained down, blinding and choking. 60 millionaire, Cole coughed, spitting out grit. They're walking them in. Thump. Thump. 2 more distinct launches. Elara didn't duck. She pressed herself against the cold stone of a firing slit, eyes scanning the horizon. Fear was screaming at her to hide, but the part of her brain that loved numbers took over. Time of flight. 12 seconds. Flash to bang. Boom. Boom. The rounds hit closer this time. One struck the outer wall, collapsing a section of masonry. The enemy was bracketing, firing one long, one short, to find the range. The next volley would be effective fire. It would land right on top of them. "We need to move!" Miller yelled. "Move where?" Cole grabbed him. "Open ground! They'll cut us down! We hold here!" "We're sitting ducks, boss. That tube is going to bury us." Elara stared at the impact craters in the courtyard. She looked at the angle of the debris. Trajectory arc is high. Steep descent. They are firing from a defilade position. "I can find them," Elara said. Her voice was small in the chaos, but firm. Cole looked at her. "What?" "The dispersion pattern," Elara pointed at the craters. "They're adjusting too fast. They have a drone or a spotter with line of sight. But the tube has to be stationary." She pulled out her tripod from her assault pack. It was a heavy piece of kit she had cursed for miles, but now it was essential. She set it up deep inside the room, back from the window to hide the muzzle flash. She locked the M2010 into the saddle. "Cover me," Elara said. "I need to stand up to see over the wall." "You're exposing yourself," Cole warned. "If I don't kill that mortar, we all die in 2 minutes," Elara replied. She didn't wait for permission. She stood on a pile of rubble, raising her scope above the sill. She ignored the enemy infantry on the ridge. She looked beyond them. She scanned the deep desert, the purple shadows of the distant dunes. "Where are you?" "Show me the math." She looked for the signature. Not a person, but a disturbance. Dust kicking up from the baseplate recoil, the flash of the muzzle. Thump. There, way out in the deep desert, a tiny puff of gray dust rising from a wadi, dry riverbed. A heat shimmer that didn't belong. She adjusted her focus. She saw 3 figures, a tube, a baseplate. They were reloading. She ranged it with her laser. The numbers flashed on her internal display. 1820 meters. Elara stared at the number. Her heart sank. The effective range of a .300 Winchester Magnum on a point target was roughly 1,200 meters. A masterful shooter could push it to 1,400. 1820 meters was over a mile. It was a prayer. "I have them," Elara said, stepping down from the rubble. She sat behind the rifle, her face pale. "Kill them!" Miller shouted as another round slammed into the roof, showering them with gravel. "I can't," Elara said, her voice trembling. "They are at 1.8 clicks, outside my engagement envelope." "Then we're dead." Miller slumped against the wall. Cole looked at Elara. He looked at the rifle. Then he looked at her eyes. The same eyes that had calculated a moving target in a windstorm. "Vance," Cole said, crawling over to her. He put a hand on her shoulder. "In the locker room. You said it's just math, velocity, drag, time." "It's too far, sir," The bullet goes subsonic before it gets there. It becomes unstable. The Coriolis effect alone will drift it 3 feet. I don't care about the physics, Cole hissed, gripping her shoulder hard. I care about the 20 seconds before that next round drops in this room and kills my team. You are the anomaly, right? You're the freak who sees numbers? Elara looked at him. The doubt was still there, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, the challenge sparked. Do the math, Elara, Cole commanded, using her first name for the first time. Make it fit. Elara took a deep breath. She pressed her cheek into the stock. She dialed the elevation turret. It maxed out. She had to hold over. She had to aim at a point in the sky where there was nothing but stars. She wasn't shooting at a man. She was shooting at a probability. Spot for me, she whispered. I'm on glass, Cole said, raising his binoculars. Elara closed her eyes for a second. She visualized the arc, a giant parabola stretching across the desert night. 1 mile, 2 seconds of flight time, Earth rotation, spin drift, humidity. She opened her eyes. The crosshairs hovered over the empty air above the wadi. Sending it. Boom. The recoil of the M2010 was a familiar punch, but the result was not. Elara and Cole watched through their optics as a tiny puff of dust erupted in the blue-gray distance of the wadi. Low and left, Cole barked, his voice tight. You missed by 10 meters, Vance. That's a warning shot. Now they know we're looking at them. Elara racked the bolt, the action smooth despite the grit in the chamber. She stared at the impact point in her mind. 10 meters. At 1820 meters, 10 meters was a microscopic error in angle, but a catastrophic failure in reality. I misread the thermal layer, Elara muttered to herself. The air is denser near the ground. It dragged the bullet down. Forget it, Cole shouted. He grabbed her shoulder, spinning her slightly. Look front. The infantry is moving. They're using the mortar volley as cover to advance. We have bogies at 400 meters. Through the crumbling wall, Elara could see the silhouettes of enemy fighters rising from the ridgeline. They were shouting, firing blindly at the ruin to suppress the Americans. Shift fire, Vance, Cole ordered. Drop the leaders. We need to break their momentum. No, Elara whispered. What did you say? If I engage the infantry, the mortar team will fire for effect, Elara said. Her eyes locked on the distant wadi. The enemy crew was frantically adjusting their tube. They were dropping a round down the pipe. We survive the infantry. We don't survive the mortar. That shot is impossible, Cole screamed, firing a burst from his Mk-18 at the approaching line. You have 19 rounds left. Don't you dare waste another one on a ghost. Shift fire. That is a direct order. Elara looked at the enemy soldiers rushing toward them. They were dangerous, lethal. But they were variables she could solve later. The mortar was the constant that equaled 0 survival. She looked at her dope book. She looked at the wind flags, a shred of cloth caught on a rebar nearby. It was hanging limp. False red, she thought. The wind here is dead. But out there, over the canyon, she remembered the dust from the first impact. It had drifted slightly right. Spin drift plus wind vector. I need to favor left and add 2 MOA for the density altitude. Vance, do you hear me? Cole was reaching for her weapon to physically pull it off the tripod. Elara reached up to her headset. With a deliberate, calm motion, she clicked the volume dial to 0. The world went silent. Cole's shouting became a mime show. The crack of the incoming AK-47 fire was muffled. The only sound left was the beat of her own heart in her ears. Thump, 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 thump. She pulled away from Cole's grasp, burying her shoulder into the stock. She closed her left eye. She aimed high, absurdly high. She was aiming at a cluster of stars well above the horizon. She held left, aiming at empty nothingness to account for the rotation of the earth moving the target while the bullet was in flight. It wasn't shooting. It was faith. The mortar team dropped the round into the tube. She saw the flash of the primer. They fired. The race was on. Their round was in the air. Her round was in the chamber. Sending it. She squeezed. The rifle roared. Elara didn't blink. She kept her eye on the scope, counting the seconds. 1 Mississippi. The bullet was supersonic. 2 Mississippi. The bullet was slowing down, crossing the sonic barrier, wobbling slightly. 3 Mississippi. Down in the wadi, one of the men was reaching for a crate of ammo. The mortar tube was still smoking. The bullet arrived. It didn't hit a man. At that distance, hitting a man was luck. Elara hadn't aimed for the crew. She had aimed for the stockpile, the 300 Win Mag round, tumbling slightly but retaining mass, smashed into the open crate of 60mm high-explosive shells sitting next to the base plate. Flash. A white-hot sun bloomed in the desert night. The secondary detonation was massive. The crate exploded, vaporizing the mortar team instantly. The shock wave kicked up a wall of sand that blotted out the stars. A second later, the sound reached them. A rolling, thunderous crump that shook the ground under Elara's stomach. Then, a whistling sound. The final enemy mortar round, the one they had fired just before they died, slammed into the earth 20 meters behind the ruin. It exploded harmlessly in the open desert. They had overcorrected. Elara exhaled. She reached up and clicked her radio back on. "Damn it, Vance! I said—" Cole's voice flooded back in, mid-sentence. He stopped. He lowered his rifle. He looked out at the burning crater in the distance, then back at the small, shaking girl behind the big gun. The enemy infantry on the ridge had stopped. They saw their heavy support disintegrate in a ball of fire. The momentum was broken. They began to pull back, unsure of what kind of god weapon the Americans possessed. "Target destroyed," Elara said softly, cycling the bolt. She picked up the hot brass casing and put it in her pocket. Shifting fire to infantry. Cole stared at her for a long second. He didn't reprimand her for the radio. He didn't congratulate her. He just nodded, a slow, grim acknowledgement that he was no longer in charge of the physics. "Good effect on target," Cole said, his voice hoarse. "Conserve. Ammo. We're not out of this yet." But they were alive, and for the moment, that was the only variable that mattered. The explosion of the mortar cache had bought them 10 minutes of stunned silence. It wasn't enough. "Move out," Cole ordered, his voice raspy. "We displace to LZ Bravo. Miller, you and Davis take Tex. Vance, take point. I've got rear security." They moved like ghosts through the ruins of the colonial fort, stepping over piles of rubble and slipping into the labyrinth of alleyways that led east toward the coast. The HVT, Wraith, was zip-tied and gagged, being shoved along by Davis. Tex was unconscious on the collapsible litter, a dead weight that slowed them to a crawl. They made it 3 blocks before the city woke up again. From the rooftops to the south, a flare popped. It drifted down on a parachute, bathing the street in harsh, wavering illumination. "Contact left," Miller shouted. Gunfire erupted from a parallel alley. It wasn't precision fire. It was a wall of lead designed to herd them. Bullets chipped the stone walls, buzzing like angry hornets. "Push through! Push through!" Cole yelled, turning to fire suppressive bursts with his MK-18. He was exposing himself to cover the litter team. It was the instinctive bravery of a leader, and it was exactly what the enemy was waiting for. Whack. The sound was wet and dull. Cole spun around, his legs buckling. He hit the dirt hard, clutching his lower abdomen. The armor plate covered the vitals, but the bullet had found the gap just below the cummerbund, in the soft tissue of the hip. "Man down!" Elara screamed, sliding into cover behind a rusted dumpster. She scrambled back to Cole. He was groaning through gritted teeth, his hands slick with blood. The wound was bad, arterial. I'm up! Cole tried to stand, but his leg gave way. He collapsed again, his face turning gray in the flare light. "Morphine!" Elara ripped the med kit from his belt. She didn't ask. She jammed the auto-injector into his thigh. "Leave it," Cole gasped, swatting her hand away. Get the team to Bravo." Miller dragged Tex's litter into cover and sprinted back. He looked at Cole, then at the map, then at the enemy closing in from two sides. "We can't carry two," Miller said, his voice cracking. "Boss, we can't carry you and Tex and the HVT. We're combat ineffective." Elara looked at the geometry of the situation. Variable 1, load weight increased by 200 lbs. Variable 2, movement speed decreased by 60%. Variable 3, enemy closing speed constant. The lines on the graph intersected in 4 minutes. Result, total elimination. "You have to split up," Elara said. She stood up. Her hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of the solution. "Negative," Miller snapped. "No man left behind." "It's not a choice, Miller," Elara said, her voice cutting over the gunfire. "The math doesn't work. If you try to carry everyone, 0% survival. If you drop weight, 60%. She grabbed Cole's drag handle and hauled him deeper into the cover of a doorway. Then she turned to Miller. "Take the HVT, take Tex, get to the LZ." "What about the boss?" Miller asked. "I'm staying," Elara said. She checked her rifle. 8 rounds left. "I'll hold this intersection. I can bottle them up in the choke point. That buys you 10 minutes. "You'll die," Cole wheezed, grabbing her ankle. His grip was weak. "Vance, don't be a hero. It's stupid." Elara looked down at him, the man who had mocked her, challenged her, and then trusted her. "I'm not being a hero, sir," she said softly, pulling her leg free. "I'm balancing the equation." She looked at Miller. "Go. That's an order from the only functional asset you have left." Miller hesitated. The code of the Brotherhood screamed at him to stay. But the mission, the HVT, the injured Tex, demanded he leave. He looked at Elara, really looked at her, for the first time not seeing a girl or a freshman, but a barrier between his team and death. "Give 'em hell, Elara," Miller whispered. He grabbed the radio handset from Cole's chest, signaled Davis, and they vanished into the darkness, dragging the litter and the prisoner. Elara was alone. She dragged Cole's heavy body further back into the shadows of the building foyer, propping him up against a wall where he couldn't be seen from the street. He was fading fast, the morphine pulling him under. "Broken arrow," Cole mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Not yet," Elara said. She walked back out to the dumpster. She set up her bipod on the rusting metal lid. She looked down the long, empty street where the enemy shadows were gathering. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the single smoke grenade she had saved. She didn't pop it yet. That was for the end. She chambered around. "Come and get it," she whispered. The intersection fell in under 2 minutes. Elara had fired her last 3 rounds of 300 Win Mag, each one dropping a shadowy figure in the street. But for every one she killed, 2 more surged forward. They weren't moving tactically anymore. They were swarming, sensing the weakness of the lone defender. She popped the smoke grenade, shrouding the front of the building in a thick, gray fog, and dragged herself backward into the darkness of the ruin's interior. She couldn't stay with Cole. If she stayed, they would find him immediately. She had to be the rabbit. She had to draw the wolves away from the wounded bear. "Come on," she whispered, her throat raw. "Follow me." She sprinted, or stumbled, toward the rear of the complex, making sure to kick debris, making sure they heard her. "American, we see you!" A voice echoed from the smoke. She didn't answer. She slipped through a narrow fissure in a collapsed wall, entering a maze of crumbled rooms that smelled of ancient rot. She abandoned the heavy M2010 rifle under a pile of rags. It was a paperweight now. She drew her M17 pistol. Check. 3 rounds in the magazine. 1 in the chamber. 4 total. She heard boots crunching on glass behind her. 2 of them, moving fast. Elara pressed herself into a shallow alcove. Her heart was hammering so hard, she thought it would give away her position. This wasn't math. This wasn't windage and elevation. This was primal. The footsteps slowed. They were hunting. "Check the corners," a voice said in Arabic. Elara looked around. She was trapped in a dead-end corridor. No exit. If they turned the corner, she was dead. She needed a variable, an anomaly. She unclipped her helmet. Her hands were slick with sweat, but she moved with a desperate, fluid precision. She placed the helmet on top of a jagged piece of rebar sticking out of a pile of rubble near the dead end. She draped her Shema scarf over it. In the low light, it looked like a head peeking over cover. Then she retreated 5 feet back, sinking into the deepest shadow of the alcove, leveling the pistol. A flashlight beam cut through the dust. The beam swept the room. It hit the helmet. "Contact!" The lead gunman opened fire instantly. The helmet spun off the rebar, clattering loudly against the stone. The gunman rushed forward, eager for the kill, his weapon raised. He stepped right past Elara's alcove. Elara stepped out. She didn't calculate. She didn't hesitate. She placed the muzzle of the M17 against the gap in his body armor, just under the armpit. Bang! Bang! The gunman crumpled without a sound. The second man, trailing behind, spun around, blinded by the muzzle flash. Elara swung the pistol. Click! A stovepipe jam. The spent casing hadn't ejected properly. The second man roared, raising his AK-47. Elara didn't try to clear the jam. She lunged. She drove her shoulder into his midsection, using his own momentum to slam him against the wall. It was a move born of pure desperation. Weight disparity be damned. He was stronger. He grabbed her throat, pinning her against the rough stone. The rifle clattered to the floor. His fingers dug into her windpipe, crushing the air out of her lungs. Vision blurred at the edges. Oxygen deprivation. Time to unconsciousness. 8 seconds. Elara's hand scrabbled on her belt. She found the hilt of her combat knife. She didn't slash. She didn't stab blindly. Even fading out, her brain sought the anatomical solution. The subclavian artery. The soft spot above the collarbone. She drove the blade down. Once. Hard. The grip on her throat released instantly. Warm blood sprayed across her face, metallic and blinding. The man staggered back, clutching his neck, making a wet, gurgling sound. He fell. Elara slid down the wall, gasping for air, coughing violently. She wiped the blood from her eyes. She was shaking uncontrollably now. The math couldn't explain this. The math couldn't sanitize the feeling of life ending under her hand. She retrieved her pistol, cleared the jam with trembling fingers, and picked up the dead man's AK-47. It was empty. Useless. She stood up. She had to keep moving. She had to circle back to Cole. She climbed a pile of debris that led to a gap in the second-story floor. She crawled out onto a precarious ledge overlooking the street. The cool night air hit her face. The smoke had cleared. She looked down toward the intersection where she had left Cole. The enemy swarm had moved on, chasing her trail into the ruins. The street was empty. But then she saw movement to the west. A column of vehicles, not technicals, armored SUVs, blacked out, moving with professional speed. QRF, she breathed. They made it. She raised her binoculars. She needed to signal them. She needed to tell them where Cole was. She focused on the laid vehicle. Men were disembarking. They wore multicam. They carried M4s. They moved like operators. Elara felt a surge of relief so strong it almost buckled her knees. But then she zoomed in. The laid man was dragging a hostage, a local fighter. He pulled his sidearm and executed the man with a casual, practiced efficiency. Elara frowned. That wasn't standard procedure. She looked closer at their gear. The patches on their shoulders were American flags, but they were wrong. The IR reflection was dull. The spacing of the stars was off, and the way they moved. It wasn't the fluid aggression of SEALs. It was stiffer, mechanical. One of the men signaled to the others. He pointed toward the ruin. He pointed right at the spot where Cole was hiding. "Major, if we don't act now, we'll lose the whole team." A memory of a voice echoed in her head. These weren't rescuers. Elara raised the radio she had taken from the dead man. It was dead. She looked at her pistol. 1 round left. "They're not ours," she whispered to the empty air. The rescue team stacked up on the door. They were going in to finish the job. Elara Vance realized with a chilling clarity that the night wasn't over. The equation had just introduced a new variable, and this one was wearing her flag. Elara scrambled back through the dust-choked hallway, her lungs burning. She didn't run. She moved with a low, desperate scuttling motion, ignoring the sharp debris cutting into her palms. She reached the pile of rags where she had stashed the M2010. It was still there. She grabbed the rifle. It was light. Too light. Empty. Her hands flew to her cargo pocket. Her fingers brushed against the cold, smooth brass of the loose rounds she had saved in the Alamo. 3 rounds. 3 chances. She jammed 1 round directly into the chamber and loaded the other 2 into the magazine. She slapped the magazine home, slid the bolt forward, and locked it down. She dragged herself to the jagged hole in the wall, overlooking the street. She didn't set up the tripod. She rested the barrel on a piece of concrete, using her fist as a support. She brought her eye to the scope. The street below was a theater of shadows. The rescue team had fanned out. There were 5 of them. They moved with discipline, weapons raised, scanning the sectors. They wore Ops Corps helmets, Cry Precision multicam, and carried M4 carbines with PEQ-15s. To the naked eye, they were American operators. "Any station, this is Viper 1-6. A voice crackled over the emergency frequency, the one open channel left. The accent was American, flat, Midwestern. "We are on site, securing the casualty. Cease fire." Elara's finger hovered over the trigger. Viper 1-6? That call sign wasn't in the briefing. She centered the crosshairs on the lead operator. He was approaching the alcove where Cole was hidden. Cole was slumped against the wall, barely conscious, his weapon on the ground. The lead operator signaled his men. 2 of them turned their backs to Cole, facing outward. Security perimeter. The lead operator holstered his rifle. He reached down. "He's helping him," Elara whispered, doubt flooding her mind. They're extracting him. The lead operator grabbed Cole by the vest. He pulled him up roughly. Cole's head lolled back. Then, the operator did something wrong. He reached for his sidearm, not his medkit, his sidearm, and he drew it with his right hand while holding Cole up with his left. Elara's mind raced back to the drills. Standard SOP for a casualty drag. Weapon in the dominant hand. Drag with the non-dominant. Maintain fire superiority. But this man was holding Cole with his left, his weak hand, and drawing a pistol with his right. That meant his rifle, slung across his chest, was now blocking his range of motion. It was clumsy. It was amateur. Or it was an execution setup. Check fire! Check fire! Blue on blue! The voice on the radio screamed, as if sensing her reticle burning into his back. Negative? Elara said, the words slipping out before she realized she was speaking. Target is hostile. I have PID. Vance, stand down! The voice barked, abandoning the Viper persona. That's a friendly extract team. You take that shot, and you're drilling a hole through a SEAL team leader. Elara didn't blink. Through the scope, the world was a grid. The lead operator pressed the muzzle of his pistol against Cole's temple. He wasn't checking for a pulse. He was finishing the job. He's not one of ours, Elara said. He's holding the weapon wrong. If you are wrong, you go to Leavenworth for life, kid. A ghost of a doubt whispered in her ear. Copy. The wind shifted, a sudden gust of desert sand, 15 approaching, full value right to left. The lead operator tightened his grip on the pistol, sending it. Boom! The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The bullet covered the 200 meters in a fraction of a second. It didn't hit the lead operator's head. That was too small a target with the wind. It hit the side plate of his body armor, just under the armpit, angling upward into the cardiac box. The impact lifted him off his feet. He was thrown backward, tearing his grip away from Cole. The pistol discharged into the dirt. The rescue team reacted instantly. They didn't shout, "Man down," or call for a medic. They spun around and unleashed a furious, coordinated volley of automatic fire at Elara's position. Valid targets. Elara ducked as concrete chips sprayed her face. The disguise was gone. Friendly forces didn't return fire at a sniper who just dropped a rogue element. They took cover. These men were returning fire to kill. Hostiles confirmed! Elara yelled into the dead air, cycling the bolt. 2 rounds left. Down in the street, the remaining 4 fake operators were advancing. They weren't retreating. They were coming to erase the witness. Elara popped back up. She didn't have time for math. She had rhythm. Target 2, moving left, crack. He dropped. Target 3, suppressive fire. She waited for the muzzle flash. Crack. He spun around, clutching his thigh. Click. Empty. The last 2 rescuers were at the door of the ruin. They were breaching. Elara dropped the rifle. It was just a club now. She pulled her knife again, her hand slick with the blood of the man she had killed minutes ago. She backed into the shadows. The cold open was over. The story was ending, and she was the last variable left to be cancelled out. The wooden door to the room splintered under a heavy boot kick. Elara backed away until her spine hit the jagged edge of the collapsed outer wall. Below her was a 20-foot drop to the street. In front of her were the last 2 members of the rescue team. They stepped into the room, silhouetted by the ambient light of the city. They didn't rush. They saw the empty rifle on the floor. They saw the small figure holding a combat knife with a shaking hand. One of them laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. He raised his carbine, aiming not at her head, but at her legs. He wanted to hurt her first. Elara tightened her grip on the knife handle. She calculated the distance. 5 meters. Reaction time versus velocity. The math was simple. 0 probability of survival. Then, the air changed. It started as a vibration in the floorboards, a rhythmic thrumming that rattled the dust from the ceiling. Then came the sound. A high-pitched whine of turbines screaming under load, overlaid by the distinct, chopping beat of rotor blades cutting heavy air. The gunmen froze. They looked up. They knew that sound. It wasn't a transport helicopter. It was an angry hornet. "Widowmaker 2-1 on station." A voice crackled over the radio on the dead man's chest downstairs, loud enough for Elara to hear through the floor. "Visual on infrared strobe at the Seoul intersection. We see the casualties." The gunman closest to Elara spun around, shouting something to his partner. They realized they were caught in the open. The one aiming at Elara turned his weapon back to her, deciding to finish the witness before running. Elara's hand flew to her shoulder pouch. She ripped out her MS-2000 distress strobe. She didn't have time to shield it. She flipped the switch, extending the blue shield. Flash, flash, flash. She wasn't signaling for rescue. She was marking the target. She threw the strobe at the feet of the gunman. "Cole," she screamed, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "Do it!" Down in the alcove, bleeding out, Lieutenant Cole heard the scream. He gripped the handset of the radio he had scavenged from the dead imposter. He looked up at the ruined second floor where the strobe was pulsing against the walls. "Widowmaker," Cole rasped, blood bubbling in his throat. "Contact. Second floor. Danger close. Clear hot." "Copy. Ground element," the pilot replied instantly. "Danger close. Heads down." Elara saw the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger. Then the world turned into noise. It wasn't a bang. It was a buzz. A deep, electric tearing sound, like canvas being ripped by a giant's hands. Bert! The wall behind the gunman disintegrated. The M134 minigun mounted on the side of the hovering AH-6 Little Bird unleashed 3,000 rounds per minute of 7.62mm hatred. The tracers formed a solid beam of red light, slicing through the masonry, the wood, and the flesh in the room. Elara threw herself flat, covering her head as the room exploded. Stone turned to powder. Wood turned to splinters. The air pressure spiked, popping her ears. The heat of the tracers washed over her. The gunmen didn't scream. They simply ceased to exist. One moment they were standing. The next, they were part of the debris cloud, shredded by the kinetic storm. The buzzing stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Silence returned, ringing and absolute, broken only by the wash of the rotor blades pushing dust into Elara's eyes. She coughed, pushing herself up. She was covered in gray dust and red mist. The floor in front of her was gone, chewed away by the Gatling gun. Through the hole in the wall, a black shape hovered. The Little Bird. On the skid, an operator sat with his legs dangling, the minigun barrels still spinning down, glowing cherry red in the dark. The bird flared, banking hard to land in the street below. Elara crawled to the edge. Her body felt disconnected, floating. 2 more helicopters, Blackhawks this time, roared overhead, fast roping figures onto the rooftops, the real cavalry. Elara tried to stand, but her legs refused. She slid down the debris pile, tumbling half the way, landing hard in the dirt of the alley. A figure was sprinting toward her. He was huge, wearing legitimate kit, an American flag patch glowing under IR. "Hands! Let me see hands!" Elara dropped the knife. She raised her hands weakly, The operator grabbed her, checking her for wounds with rough professional efficiency. "I got a survivor. Female. Status is walking wounded." Elara grabbed his plate carrier. "Cole," she wheezed. "The lieutenant, he's—" "We got him, ma'am," the operator said, his voice changing from aggressive to gentle. "Medic is on him. He's breathing." Elara looked past him. Under the wash of the little bird's rotors, a team was working on Cole. They were cutting off his gear, starting an IV. He looked pale, deathly still. As they lifted him onto the litter, Cole's head lolled to the side. His eyes opened, unfocused, searching. They landed on Elara. He didn't smile. He didn't give a thumbs up. He just raised one hand, 2 fingers extended, and tapped his temple. "Use your head." Then his hand dropped. "Load 'em up! We are bingo on fuel!" the loadmaster shouted. The operator scooped Elara up as if she weighed nothing. She didn't fight. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a void so deep she felt like she was falling into it. As the helicopter lifted off, banking away from the burning city, Elara looked down at her hands. They were stained with oil, dust, and blood, some of it hers, some of it from the men she killed. She closed her eyes and saw the numbers again, but this time, they weren't clean variables on a whiteboard. They were messy, chaotic, and terrifying. The probability of survival had been 0, but she was still here, which meant the math was wrong. Or maybe, for the first time, she had solved for X, the variable she couldn't quantify, the human element. Darkness took her before the bird even reached the coastline. The room was white, not the white of purity, but the oppressive, blinding white of administrative sterility. It smelled of antiseptic and toner ink. Private First Class Elara Vance sat on a metal chair, her arm in a sling, a bandage taped over the cut on her cheek where the concrete chip had struck. Across the table sat 2 men. One was Major Sterling. The other was a man in a gray suit who hadn't introduced himself. On the table between them lay a stack of paper. The top sheet was stamped in red. Top secret, no foreign. "Let's go over the timeline one more time, Private," the suit said. His voice was smooth, bored, and dangerous. "I've told you 3 times, Elara said, her voice raspy. "We were ambushed. We secured the HVT. A secondary element engaged us. They were wearing American uniforms. They attempted to execute Lieutenant Cole." The suit sighed. He picked up a black marker. He opened the file in front of him and drew a thick black line through a paragraph of text. "That's not what happened, Private." Elara stared at him. "I killed 3 of them. I saw their faces." "You engaged a rogue militia group that had acquired stolen surplus equipment," the suit corrected, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no blue on blue. There was no compromise of U.S. codes. "Do you understand the implications if the world thinks we are shooting each other?" Elara looked at Major Sterling. The major looked away, studying a spot on the wall. He was a soldier, but he was also an officer who understood the game. The truth was a variable that didn't fit the political equation. "The HVT is in custody," the suit continued. "The mission is a success. That is the narrative. You performed your duties as a support asset. Nothing more." He slid a piece of paper toward her. Non-disclosure agreement. "Sign it. And you go back to your unit. You get a commendation for meritorious service in a support role. No silver star. No parade." Elara looked at the paper. She thought about the rescue team. She thought about the woman in the courtyard. She thought about the math that governed life and death, and how messy the reality actually was. She picked up the pen. "It doesn't matter. she whispered. Excuse me? The math, she said, signing her name. It balances out, whether you write it down or not. 2 days later, the base mess hall. The clamor of the chow hall was a familiar assault on the senses. Trays clattering, soldiers shouting, the smell of grease and industrial cleaner. It was the sound of normalcy. Elara sat alone at a corner table. Her tray was untouched. She was staring into her black coffee, watching the ripples form from the vibration of a passing truck outside. She was invisible again. The freshman. The girl who checked ballistics data and cleaned rifles. The operators at the other tables didn't look at her. To them, she was just support staff, probably a clerk or an analyst. They didn't know she had held the Alamo. They didn't know she had taken a 1.8-kilometer shot in the dark. And she realized, with a strange sense of peace, that she preferred it that way. The silence was safe. Clack, 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 the rhythmic sound of crutches on linoleum cut through the noise near her table. Elara looked up. Lieutenant Cole stood there. He looked terrible. His face was pale and gaunt, bruises blooming like storm clouds under his eyes. He was leaning heavily on aluminum crutches, his left leg encased in a rigid brace. He was wearing PT gear, but his bearing was still that of a predator. The mess hall went slightly quieter. People watched. Cole was a Tier 1 asset. He was royalty here. He didn't look at the room. He looked at Elara. He hobbled closer and stopped at her table. He didn't sit. He couldn't. Sir, Elara said, starting to stand up. Sit down, Vance, Cole grunted. It wasn't an order. It was a request. He looked at her untouched food. Then he looked at her bandaged arm. They tell me the official report is creative, Cole said, his voice low. It's efficient, sir, Elara replied. Cole snorted. A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. Yeah, efficient. He shifted his weight, wincing slightly. He reached into the pocket of his shorts. I tried to get you a trident, Cole said, looking at the ceiling, as if admitting it was painful. Command said no. Said you haven't been through the pipeline. Said it's against regulation. I don't need a trident, sir. I'm not a SEAL. No, Cole said. He looked back down at her, his eyes intense and serious. You're not. You're something else. He pulled his hand out of his pocket and slapped something onto the table. It wasn't a medal. It was a Velcro patch. It was old, frayed at the edges, stained with sweat and dirt. It featured a skull wearing a headset, crossed by a lightning bolt and a sniper reticle. The emblem of SEAL Team 4's sniper section, specifically Cole's own patch. The guys, Miller, Davis, Cole cleared his throat. We voted. You don't pay for drinks in our team room, ever. Elara looked at the patch. It was worth more than the silver star the suit had denied her. It was respect. It was the acknowledgement that the variable had solved the equation. Thank you, sir, she whispered. Cole nodded once. He didn't offer a handshake. That would be too formal. He just tapped the table with his knuckles. 2 taps. Keep the math right, Elara, he said. He turned and crutched away, moving slowly through the sea of soldiers, leaving the small girl alone in the corner. Elara picked up the patch. She ran her thumb over the rough embroidery. She slipped it into her pocket, right next to the brass casing from the Alamo shot. She took a sip of her coffee. It was cold and bitter. It tasted perfect. She stood up, picked up her tray, and walked to the disposal line. She had a rifle to clean, and for the first time, she knew exactly who she was holding it for.